someplace. With regards then to grammar, here's a few things we know. We know that it's very possible to sign a high sign-to-voice ratio. Sign-to-voice ratio is a term that I invented back in Northern Illinois University when I was working on language samples, and it's very easy to calculate, and how to do that is explained in my first textbook. But we now have quite a bit of information to show that that's possible. In the language sampling that I did, the meaning that was encoded by people usually averaged around 82%, and that's the kind of thing that I mean that I'm referring to when I say just don't assume that your meaning is always real clear just because it's in your head. Lots of times our meaning is not clear, and I could bore you to death with language samples to show you that. We know that the consistency of use of a grammatical system is associated with high English skills. There's been just a couple of studies that have showed that. We know there's a positive relationship when people use affixes. Those are like irresponsible and unknown and happiness, those kind of affix markers. When those are used with students, and in this case the study was on mothers and I did one with teachers, we know that students will start to use those markers. We know that deaf students exposed to a grammar-based model read better than students who are not. And we know that deaf students who are exposed to grammar-based adult models have better English skills than students exposed to signed English and PSE. And I already referred to that study. Some of the initial work in our field was about how you couldn't sign, and some of you know this famous Marmo and Petito study that showed that people only signed 10% of what they said, etc. That work basically is done, it's all done, all these studies right here are done on systems that were designed to encode semantics, and those studies just show that people just don't sign very well. And just because you say you sign a particular method of signing, it doesn't mean you do it well. So, like usual in deaf ed, there's not a lot of surprises here. It's just we get so emotional over these things. Okay, I'd like to move along to C1. This is my favorite example of a way of explaining C1. Now, those of you who use MS, please don't be offended by this. It's just a teaching tool. Like I said, C1 is a system that basically breaks signs. I'm glad you like this. I put up with a lot to get this example. My daughter is 13. One of my daughters, she just turned 14. She doesn't have one good thing to say about me. And I was shopping with her one day, and I saw this on a T-shirt, and I had to get paper out of my purse and write it down, and she was just so embarrassed. Of course, I can be eating dinner and I embarrass Hannah, but she just couldn't believe that I was going to stand there and copy this all down. And I'd buy the shirt, of course. But I think this demonstrates the principle of C1 for us. Basically, it's a system that's broken down by pivots or parts of words, and does not coincide most often with the meaning of the word. And many people know the famous example of butterfly. I think the credit for the 2 out of 3 rule, whether you love it or hate it, should go to the C1 people because they did actually invent it. I think the 2 out of 3 rule, where if sound, spelling, or meaning, if 2 of those things are the same, you sign the sign the same, is actually a very simple way of explaining English. And whoever thought that up, I think, really deserves a round of applause. So that's where that originated. And then last year or the year before, I published an article in the American Annals of the Deaf with Wanda Milburn, who is a strong advocate in Amarillo. This is just one page of it. I'm not putting this up here so you can read it. I'm just showing you that, see, it looks like a journal article. It came from a journal. And we published an historical look at C1 and provided every piece of research on the system that is available. And one of the important things about C1 is, like I said, people usually fall on the floor laughing about C1 or MSS at almost any social event I've ever been to. But what this says in this paragraph is it looks at the SAT reading scores in Texas and compares Amarillo and Richardson reading scores to those in the rest of the state, controlling for socioeconomic status and some other important variables, and shows that they had at this time very high reading scores. And again, I think that whether you like the system or don't like the system is irrelevant. And what I'd like you to think about is, what can you learn from the people that use that system? Obviously, there's something good about that system. I was part of a team with Ralph White and a man named Richard Stoker, who's an oral man. And Ralph White was sort of the deaf community ASL guy, and then I was the systems person. We were invited in by Amarillo at their expense to evaluate their program several years ago. And we're all three very impressed that, first of all, we could all communicate with the children, even though Richard didn't sign and none of us knew C1. And we were very impressed with the bilingual nature of the program, in that there was deaf adults around at all our social events, and the parents and the deaf adults seemed to really know each other. I don't think you could have pulled this 3-day thing off and just, you know, borrowed these deaf people for the couple of days. I mean, there was relationships that had clearly been formed there. So again, I think a lot of people talk about that program and don't really know what's going on there, and since it's in your state, you might want to go take a look. So I forget what number I'm on here, maybe 3, but if we could show an example of C1 and just look for the correspondence between what's said and what's signed. Okay, I think I have everybody mesmerized now. We can probably turn that one off.